So after essentially ignoring the more affordable end of the smartphone market for a few years now, OnePlus seems to be making concerted efforts to get stuck back in there. So they've only just released their OnePlus Nord, which at 379 quid is one of the cheapest blows we've had from them in some time. And now they've launched a couple of extra budget blows, including this bad boy here, the OnePlus Nord N10 5G. Very catchy name indeed. And this bad boy costs 329 quid, so 50 quid cheaper than the original vanilla Nord. It goes on pre-order on Amazon from November the 14th. You'll be able to actually get your hands on one from November the 27th, so not too long. But that's enough chat. Let's actually whip the OnePlus Nord N10 5G out of its box, take you on a full-on tour of the hardware, the software, test out the gaming prowess and all that good stuff. And for more on the latest, greatest tech, please do poke subscribe and what was the other thing again? Notifications bell. Sorry, it's Friday morning and my brain is shot. Whoa, bloody hell, did that a bit too enthusiastically. So let's see what we've actually got in the rest of the box before we turn our attention to the phone. So you've got your usual quick start guide, yada yada yada, and your porky pin device. No letter from Pete, sadly. You have to spunk up for one of the more expensive OnePluses for that. And of course you've got the Warp Charge 30 adapter as well. I've got a European review model, hence it's a 2-pin effort. And you get the gorgeous bright red OnePlus charging cable. And that's it, very straightforward stuff. And there we have the OnePlus Nord N10 5G. First impressions are, it definitely feels like more of a budget smartphone from OnePlus compared with the other efforts, even the Nord. It's only available in this one colour, and that is Midnight Ice. So as you'd expect with having midnight in the name, it's a very, very, very dark finish. Not really sure what the ice bit is all about, because obviously if you look at anything at midnight, regardless of what it is, it's going to look black, right? I mean, you might as well call it Midnight Squirrel or Midnight Bacon Sandwich. Still, I do quite like the light streak effect that you get here on the OnePlus Nord N10 5G. Seen that on quite a few budget blows from the likes of Realme and Oppo, so it just adds a bit of extra flair. And while OnePlus hasn't specifically stated what the Nord N10 5G is made of, that definitely feels like a plastic bag to me. It's got a little bit of flex in there, but nothing too severe. At 190 grams, it's got a reasonable heft to it. Certainly doesn't feel toy-like or anything. And the good news is you do at least get Gorilla Glass 3 coating around the front, so hopefully that screen will stay in good nick. And of course, something we haven't seen from OnePlus in quite some time, a rear-mounted fingerprint sensor rather than one built into the actual display itself, which I personally quite prefer anyway. And there's something else on the OnePlus Nord N10 5G that we haven't seen on a OnePlus handset for quite some time. Are you ready? Brace yourself. It's got a motherfucking headphone jack. So gonna get this bad boy all set up and ready for action now, but first let's just have a quick squint inside of the SIM tray, if I can actually get the bugger out. Don't bite your fingernails, kiddies. Not good. So you can fit a pair of SIM cards into the OnePlus Nord N10 5G, SIM 1 and SIM 2, but the real headline stealer here is the fact that you've actually got micro SD memory card support in this bad boy as well in one of those SIM slots. And that's something we haven't seen in a OnePlus smartphone, again like a headphone jack, for at least a couple of generations, so fantastic news. So you can actually expand the storage using that micro SD memory card slot by a further 512 gigs, but luckily you do get 128 gigs on there as standard. And that's UFS 2.1, of course, not 3.1, unlike the more premium OnePluses. So the OnePlus Nord N10 5G is all set up and ready for action. One of the first things you'll notice about it is that it actually has the older Android 10 and OxygenOS 10 on it, rather than the fresh new Android and OxygenOS 11. So it is a shame that the N10 5G doesn't come with the freshest software out of the box, unlike the latest OnePlus 8T, of course. But OnePlus's update schedule seems to be pretty aggressive, so hopefully should be getting it before the end of the year. And I've always been a big fan of OxygenOS. It's got that nice sort of stock Android-ish feel, but with a few extra bonus bits slathered on top that really are genuinely useful. So for instance, you've got more customization options on here than you do with stock Android. You can change up the clock style, you can play around with the likes of the colors in the menu, the system icons. Sadly, there's no always on display option on here because that's something that was introduced in OxygenOS 11 and you need an OLED screen for that anyway. You've got lots of different clock styles you can use for the ambient display, as OnePlus terms it. So you can check out the likes of the time and any weight notifications just by picking up your phone. And so far, the rear-mounted fingerprint sensor seems to do its job absolutely fine. Reasonably responsive, not the swiftest unlock action in the world, but absolutely fine. And one of those OxygenOS additions is a good bit of face unlock action as well. So you got that as a backup to the fingerprint sensor. Oh, it's starting to look like something out of Tron. There we go. And OnePlus's face unlock tech is normally pretty swift and responsive, so let's just check it out. Yep, definitely seems to do the job. Lovely stuff. And of course, the Nord N10 5G packs all of the usual Android features that we know and love, the likes of the dark mode. You got Google Pay support via NFC on here. But anyway, let's turn our attention now to the OnePlus Nord N10 5G's hardware, and let's start with that 6.49-inch screen, which, as you can see there, is surrounded by some fairly chunky bezels, especially down below. It is an IPS screen, not an OLED, so if you want a bit of OLED tech, you will have to upgrade to the OnePlus Nord for an extra 50 quid, but for an IPS screen, it seems absolutely fine, reasonably bright on that top level. Might have some visibility issues in extreme sunlight or something, but not too shabby. The color temperature seems quite neutral by default, but you can dive into the display settings and play around with the white balance if you like. You got the usual night modes and stuff in there, but you can't alter the actual color vibrancy or anything like you can on those OLED displays. That Full HD Plus resolution keeps video nice and crisp on the likes of Disney Plus and YouTube, but sadly Netflix, at the time I shot this video, only has Widevine L3 support, so you can't stream in HD, it's SD all the way, and there's certainly no HDR support on the OnePlus Nord N10 5G either. But hopefully that's something that OnePlus will rectify very shortly. And of course, like most rivals around this sort of price point, you do actually have full 90Hz support as well, so just dive into the advanced screen settings. As you can see there, it is set to 90Hz by default, and as you can see there, that will be dynamically switched between 60 and 90 depending on what you're actually up to at the time. And the OnePlus Nord N10 5G does actually support a stereo speaker setup as well, so let's just bump up the volume, see what we got.
Telly boxes around, which is great news if you don't have space for a flipping huge cinema screen in your lounge.
So unsurprisingly, like a lot of stereo speaker setups on these more budget-friendly smartphones, that earpiece speaker isn't really pulling its full weight. Definitely the bulk of the audio is coming out of that bottom-mounted speaker, but overall not bad. The clarity's okay on that sort of top volume level. A little bit tinny obviously coming out of the earpiece, but the bottom one does the job. And as I mentioned before, you do get that headphone jack and full Bluetooth 5.1 support on here as well. Now, OnePlus's chipset of choice for the Nord N10 5G is the fresh new Qualcomm Snapdragon 690. This is the first 600 series chipset which comes with built-in 5G. Out of curiosity, I did a bit of benchmarking, and obviously, you know, you can't rely on benchmarks too heavily, but that's a very similar score to what we saw out of the Snapdragon 765, which you had packed into the likes of the Motorola Moto G 5G Plus. And certainly scrolling around on Android seems nice and swift and smooth. It should be able to do absolutely everything you need, and loading up apps is again sort of reasonably quick. Definitely helped along by the 6 gigs of RAM. But of course, the best way of testing out a smartphone's grunt is with a good bit of gaming, and you do have the game space feature packed onto the OnePlus Nord N10 5G as usual. This gives you fast access to all of your games, and you've got the usual gaming modes as well, including that Fnatic Mode as well, which just allows you to basically block all notifications, and it really boosts the performance, the CPU, the GPU, as you can see. Make sure no other background apps are hogging your memory, and also that network bandwidth as well. So I'm going to keep that on and try a good bit of Call of Duty action. Now, when I was playing Call of Duty on the OnePlus Nord N10 5G, the graphic quality settings topped off at very high, and the frame rate you couldn't go above high, but I found that it was a nice consistent frame rate, nice smooth experience throughout, even after playing several games in a row. The phone did start to get a little bit warm on that plastic back end after probably about sort of 20 or 30 minutes of gaming, but nothing too severe, certainly nothing troublesome that I would be worried about, and I saw no degradation in performance after a little bit of time either. So certainly if you are looking for a smartphone to get a good bit of gaming on the go, then the OnePlus Nord N10 5G will do the job. And of course, because it's called the OnePlus Nord N10 5G, it does have 5G support. It's actually built into that Snapdragon 690 chipset. It is just sub 6, of course, not millimeter wave, as you kind of expect at this sort of budgety price point. And you've also got a 4,300 milliamp battery packed inside of here as well, so a slight increase over the original vanilla Nord. Hopefully should keep you going all day long, no problem whatsoever. And you got our Warp Charge 30T tech in there as well, so 30-watt fast charging definitely should do the job. And so let's finish up this unboxing of the OnePlus Nord N10 5G with a squint at that quad lens rear camera tech. Now, the original Nord also had a quad lens rear camera, but it is different hardware here on the N10 5G. The main primary shooter is actually a 64 megapixel effort here, but it does use a 4-in-1 pixel binning. As you can see here, it shoots at 16 megapixels by default. You can bump up to that 64 megapixel resolution if you want to though. I'd say though, for your everyday shots, you want to stick with that 16 megapixel mode because it'll just help to brighten up snaps and keep them nice and sharp when the conditions aren't quite perfect. And certainly the color capture seems quite strong, even with quite harsh lighter elements invading the frame, like you can see right there. Detail levels in ambient indoor conditions, sort of not too bad. You don't get some of the finer detail that you'll hopefully capture if you're shooting outdoors. They do have all of the usual bonus mode shenanigans, including a good bit of portrait action, of course, to get that bokeh blurry background effect, which OnePlus smartphones normally do pretty damn well. You've got the nightscape mode as well, which just takes lots of different shots, different exposure levels, and then combines them in order to create a brighter, more balanced result. And you can see here that definitely seems to help out a bit. Certainly we've got strong light intruding on the scene as well. You've got quite a lot bit more background information than we did on those other shots. And as usual, you've got the full Pro controls as well if you want to dive on in there and have a fiddle around with the likes of the white balance, the ISO levels, etc. And that should have full support for RAW images as well. Yep, indeed, as well as just standard JPEG. And besides that 64 megapixel primary lens, the rest of the hardware is basically the same as the OnePlus Nord. So you've got an 8 megapixel ultra wide angle lens, which I found certainly on the original Nord, it tended to produce slightly warmer colors than the primary lens. And you do have a digital zoom, which you can dive into as well, but there's no optical zoom on here because the final two lenses are just a basic macro lens and a monochrome lens. And then for your video, you can shoot up to 4K resolution footage, although you don't have that 60 frames per second option here, unfortunately, on the OnePlus Nord N10 5G. It tops off at 30 FPS, although you do have the Cine 30 FPS option, which gives you a 21:9 widescreen effect. And last up, if we swap around to that front-facing camera, it's a 16 megapixel effort. It should be absolutely fine for your sort of your basic Facebook and Insta shots. And oh my god, yeah! So that right there in a tasty wee nutshell is the OnePlus Nord N10 5G. Again, not the best name by any means, but if you want to get that sort of 5G connectivity and some respectable specs around that sort of £300 price point, should be a reasonable rival to the likes of the Moto G 5G Plus and the Realme X50 5G, especially if you're a fan of a bit of that OxygenOS, which I definitely enjoy quite a lot. Of course, here's hoping that it gets Android 11, OxygenOS 11, and that Widevine L1 support really soon. So what do you reckon about the OnePlus Nord N10 5G? It'd be great to hear your thoughts down below. Please do subscribe, ding that notifications bell, and have yourselves a lovely rest of the week. Cheers everyone, love you!